Hey all, welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren, I'm your host, and today I've got a special guest, Dr. Douglas Baldwin. He is the author of Sous Vide for the Home Cook, and he's put together the industry standard pasteurization table for sous vide cooking. Can't wait to get into the discussion with Dr. Baldwin. I'll be right back.
Smoking, grilling, getting hot and hotter, sous vide and chilling from fire and water.
Hey all, it's Darren. I want to take a second to talk about ThermoWorks and their ThermoPen and ThermoPop instant read thermometers. They are the industry standard and industry leading, most accurate, most durable, most dependable on the market. You'll find these in most professional kitchens. The ThermoPen is accurate within a half a degree, under 3-second readout time, and is the most durable on the market. The ThermoPop is a little bit more pocket friendly with about a 5-second read time, but still very reliable and dependable. Check out the ThermoWorks products in the link below. Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I am Darren. I am your host, of course, and I have a great guest again today. I love having guests like this on. This is Mr. Douglas Baldwin. He is the author of Sous Vide for the Home Cook. Actually, one of the most used reference guides I can say that I know of in my Facebook groups and people that are using Sous Vide. So I'm very excited to have Douglas on. Thanks for being on, Douglas Baldwin. Introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I'm Dr. Douglas Baldwin. I have a sort of odd background. I have a PhD in applied mathematics where I looked at things like tsunami waves and Bose-Einstein condensates. But while I was getting my PhD, I ran across a reference to sous vide cooking in a New York Times article by Harold McGee, the great Harold McGee. And I thought, oh, I know a lot about cooking, but I've never heard of this sous vide thing. So I started looking around and ran on to this fantastic forum, eGullet, that used to be really popular back in the day. And there's all kinds of interesting people on there, including Nathan Marivold and Chris Young and all kinds of other wonderful people. And I just soaked it all up and just absolutely loved it. And then I started looking around the internet and thought, golly, the internet's wrong on a bunch of these things. I really have to correct the internet, as almost all good internet stories begin. And so I wrote up my practical guide to sous vide cooking, a pretty detailed web page. And it wasn't too long after that the creators of the Sous Vide Supreme, which was really the first sort of home sous vide unit, contacted me and said, hey, we need a cookbook for our new appliance. Any interest? And I said, oh, sure, why not? So I luckily at that time I had a fellowship for my PhD. So I basically took the summer off for my PhD and wrote my cookbook, Sous Vide for the Home Cook, and then continued working on my PhD, finished it up. It took quite a long time, but finished my PhD, started consulting a little bit with Chris Young from the co-author of Modernist Cuisine, and I had so much fun consulting with ChefSteps back at the time that I ended up resigning from my postdoc, and shortly later started working for ChefSteps. Worked for them for about 5 years. Started there before Joule was a thing. I started a little bit before the first brainstorming session that became the Joule Sous Vide Circulator. And I also worked with them on their sous vide courses. Probably my favorite part was the map of sous vide cooking with a great designer there named Rick Wallace. And after that, after ChefSteps, I joined Breville, which also has PolyScience, and I've been working there for about 2 years. So that's the short who I am.
Well, that's it. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. Thanks for having being on. Like I said, go as long as you want, and we're always going to go back deep dive into that stuff. But that's a good 3,000 or 30,000 feet, overview, and it's really interesting though because I want to go back and dig into this because like I told you off before we got on camera, is talking to Chris Young and some other people, like even Kenji,
Mm.
a lot of people that are on the top tier of, what we're doing here are people that didn't start out cooking, they didn't start out in culinary school. And that was one of the things when I talked to Chris was, when you guys did Modernist Cuisine, people were kind of frowned about it, because the chefs were like, well, this should be written by a chef instead of, these guys are just a bunch of scientists and, weirdos that just love to cook. So, but it seems to me that the people that aren't really, gone to culinary school are the ones that can look outside the box. They're not steeped in the tradition of French cooking and stuff like that. Talking to Kenji, he learned all of his stuff when he went working in a restaurant when he was in college, and decided after he got his degree he was hey, I want to do this for a living instead of being an architect. And so he pursued that, and then he, next thing you know, he's writing the food lab. So it's just interesting to me that people like yourself, who has a PhD in mathematics, is working in the food industry. So when did you start getting interested in cooking? Was it when you were in school? Was it when you were young? I mean, when did you? Let's go back and see when. I know everybody loves to eat, so
yeah. I have to credit that to my mother. She said, "Well, when you go off to college, I don't want you just eating junk food. You need to know how to cook." So she took upon herself to make sure that I knew how to cook before I went to college, and I really got at that time into more of these sort of. She grew up on a farm, so it was very much more farm sort of cooking, the kind of thing that you'd expect from the old
pork chops and steaks and
yes,
chicken.
Exactly. And never being afraid to use a can.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's sort of what got me on that. And I, of course, being a bit of an engineer and a scientist, where I went to undergraduate was School of Mines. And so it's very much a engineering school. And so I, of course, ran across the America's Test Kitchen. I mean, I think every engineer picks up a copy of the America's Test Kitchen and goes, oh, my goodness, this is great. This is a very engineering approach to food.
Right.
But it was really Harold McGee and the on food and cooking, the sort of where it really opened up the eye to me of, oh, I can apply science, the thing that is my day job that I love so much, to this other thing I love. And so I shift for me. I don't know why before I hadn't heard of Harold McGee, haven't read it, why I didn't think, of course, I'm a scientist, I should apply science to everything. But it was just one of those, oh yeah, right. I can do this. And so I think that's where a lot of this comes from. It's just this, how can we leverage information from one area into another? And really that's what my day-to-day job is now, is I jump into a team at Breville. They might be working on an oven or a toaster or an espresso machine, doesn't matter. And I just sort of ask, well, what's the chemistry and physics of this? How can we make the food result better? How can it be a better experience for the customer? And I just look at it very much from that, the good old Feynman's lectures in physics kind of, what's the fundamental science of it and how does that apply to great food results? And I think just having that different perspective opens up a world of possibilities.
Yeah, when I started cooking, I was younger. I started working in restaurants, in my teens. I started washing dishes and worked my way into the kitchen. So I was always, I didn't really have that analytical mind towards it. It was more of, this is how we put the food together to put it up on the thing to serve it to somebody. It was later on in life where I started thinking, well, I want to know the whys. I want to know the hows. Why does this work? Why do you do it this way? And I think a lot of times culinary school misses that point with people that go to culinary school. It's just do what I tell you. Here's how you do it. It's not, this is why this works this way. It's more of just, okay, I'm going to show you how to make an omelet. This is how you do it, instead of, okay, why is the omelet being, the way it is? Why is it the emulsion, better than, any other form of making the omelet? Things like that.
Yeah.
When I started reading with Meathead Goldwyn stuff, a lot of the stuff on his website, and a lot of barbecue guys don't like his site because he gets into the true science of it. He doesn't like the myths and the traditional, stuff that doesn't have any, scientific background to it. The people, well, you got to use mustard as a binder. You got to do it this way. And, the beer can chicken is one of his favorite things to go off on. But trying to understand the whys and hows and why things work is, really caught on to me. And that's, I really found that I love to understand the whys, because if you don't understand why something's working, then you really don't know what you're doing, right? You're just doing something that somebody showed you to do. And that's not learning. That's just copying somebody, right?
Yeah. No, like Meathead's wonderful description of a barbecue stall about the evaporative cooling on the surface is just so much fun. And it's something that I think about all the time. Even something like toasting a piece of bread. You go, well, why would evaporative cooling matter so much for bread? And you think, well, it's still pretty wet, right? So you put in, start toasting. It takes quite a while for the surface to dry out, and you're using tons of energy to evaporate the air off the surface. And once it starts to dry out and desiccate, then you can finally get that Maillard browning reaction. But you don't want to get so hot that you get the burning. So it's a wonderful balance. I think that comes up so much in grilling and barbecue too, is what's the balance between getting rid of this water that we don't want, keeping the water we do want, getting the flavor from the Maillard reaction, but let's not, carbonize it.
Yeah, we don't want to dry it out. So we're, we take a bite of it and just, so yeah. And it's definitely been, like I said, if you don't understand what's going on, then you're just really just copying what somebody else did. You're not really putting it to use. And it's also, I like some of the books where they explain how the different, spices and seasonings work together. Why, the different parts of your tongue that, taste certain, seasonings and why they work that way, and why these certain, seasonings pair well together, just like wine, why it tastes different, why things work together differently. But, and I think a lot of people miss that, they, especially in the barbecue side, they just, I saw somebody rub mustard on his pork butt before he put it on there, and you got to wait till it gets to 200 degrees and then take it off. And that's it. I just did what he did,
Yeah.
well, why? Well, why is the stall happen? Well, it just does. No, there's a reason why. And if you don't understand why, because it's not always at 160 degrees, it may be at 150. It might be because that particular pig, the muscles in that pig, he was stronger than the other one that you did last week, and the protein, strands were tighter packed or something like that. So if you don't understand a lot of that stuff, then you're just running blind and just copying what other people do. So I guess you got into the e-gullet thing when you were in college, and you just started, following some of the other people on the, cause this was the old bulletin board, message boards, right?
Yeah, this was back when I was getting my PhD up at CU Boulder. And it's a little bit of a funny story of how I got into it, and that I was almost done with my first year of my PhD program, and I had a traumatic brain injury and lost my memory for about 4 months. So I couldn't quite do the advanced mathematics, but since I wasn't spending 12 hours a day doing mathematics, I could look around and see some other things. And that's when I ran across the gullet, and I spent so many wonderful hours on it. Just the spirit of sort of creativity and the sort of almost like the Mythbusters style of science of here's a question, let's just see if we can investigate it and find something out on it. And of course, back then you didn't really have, you could get the PolyScience big box circulator back then, but of course I was a graduate student, so I couldn't afford that. So I had all kinds of little wires with PID controllers and slow cookers and little aquarium air bubblers to circulate the air. The first dinner party I had some people over, some of my fellow graduate students, and I just plunge my hand in to pull out the chicken breast from the water, and the whole table goes, look over, like, what? It's like, no, this isn't boiling water.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, even still today, I mean, it's not. There's still a lot of people that don't understand or know what sous vide is, even though it
Mm,
is quite popular now. You can buy a cheap circulator on Amazon for $30 now, but
yeah.
yeah, they become a lot more people are catching on, and I think once the fog, and this is one of those cooking
Mm,
methods where you can't just wing it. You got to understand what's going on, because you can.
exactly.
I see some, especially in the Facebook groups that I run and that I'm in, you got somebody, well, I tried sous vide once and it just didn't work for me. And it's like, well, what did you do? And did you follow somebody's recipe, or did you
Hmm.
just pick a time and temp in your brain and it just didn't, you didn't follow a process or understand how you have to take it out of the bag and pat it dry and then try to sear it so that you doesn't turn out soggy and ugly looking. So
Oh, and that's one of the main things that prompted me to write my guide and cookbook back in the day is so I feel very strongly that everyone has the right to safe, delicious food. And so I had seen so many things in the forums back then
yeah,
and websites suggesting things that I thought, oh, that sounds dangerous. That,
it still goes on,
depending
still
on,
goes on today.
oh, it does? Oh, that's too bad. Although it's surprising how often someone says, well, the Baldwin tables say this. It's like, well, yeah, fair
Well,
enough.
that's at least that's what we have now. We have
Yeah.
that to go throw it at people that go, "Hey, you dummy, you can't do that. Here's why."
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. In my sort of deep dive into the safety and science of sous vide, and I always thought it's sort of funny at the end of my PhD, I had how many papers I had read on applied mathematics and how many papers I had read on food science. And I realized that there's about 50 more food science ones. It's like, wait a minute, I have like 300 of this and 150 of this or 200 of this. Is like, oh, I guess that sort of explains my interest these days. But so I started really getting into it, and saw some shocking things like one paper had like 15 to 20% of the US and UK population is highly susceptible to foodborne illness. I thought, my goodness, that is not a small amount of people.
Right.
And so I thought, well, someone needs to come up with some advice to that portion of the population to say, well, how can you have great food safely? And so that's really what got me to make my tables and get pretty deep into the areas of foodborne pathogens and food safety and all these things. And so that was really a big push on it. It's just I felt like, everyone deserves good food.
Now, how did you turn in, having a PhD in
Mhm.
advanced mathematics into being a microbiologist?
Well, it turns out that applied mathematics, which is a little different than pure mathematics, applied mathematics is really just how can we apply math to any problem. So applying math to the growth or destruction of pathogens is really not fundamentally different than the sort of math I would need to look at nonlinear waves propagating through shallow water. Really, for both, I end up using the same sort of numerical computation for both. Actually, I think it's that book there, which is Spectral Methods. So what that is it uses things like Fourier transforms and polynomials to solve differential equations. At the end of the day, how food heats is really a differential equation. It's just the old heat equation with different boundary conditions. And we can use really simple models for how do we see the growth or the destruction of pathogens. We can just add that into the model. So it's quite a bit of complicated computer code, which is a little funny for when I first started at Breville. They said, oh, we're making this new HydroPro sous vide circulator. And, we have an algorithm in there that computes the cooking time. I go, oh, that's interesting. What's it from? They said, oh, it's from the PolyScience toolbox. And I go, oh, well, I wrote the formulas for my webpage, and then I shared the code with a guy who said he wanted to make an app out of it, who then made an app, who then sold it to PolyScience, and then they put it in the circulator. So my first job at Breville was looking at this sort of game of telephone of code back to the original code that I had written.
Well, did you ever make any money off of it, or did he just make it?
I hope he made money off of it.
No, but did you make
I
any
did
money
not.
off it? So there you go. Well, now you're making money from him. So
Yeah, exactly. So
you should
it all
say,
worked
"Where's
out
my
in the
back
end.
pay? Where's my back pay?"
Yeah. but I'm just so happy that I could look over and go, oh, nope, there's a few typos here. Let's get this fixed so that it's actually right for everyone to use. So
now, when you wrote your book or the website and you put this all together, did you get anybody from like the microbiologist side or food safety side? Go, hey, who are you to write this? Because like Chris was telling me about
a little
in his
bit,
podcast.
but so I found the people in the food science and food safety community to be really warm and welcoming. In particular, a guy named Pete Snyder, who was one of the sort of big guns in the field of food safety. And I reached out to him, and he was just so warm and friendly, and he reviewed the science on my webpage and let me know where he thought things could be improved, and just such a wonderful experience. I think he's retired now. I hope he's still alive. But he was, I think, in his 80s when I first reached out to him back in the middle 2000. So it's but no, I found people really warm and welcoming. There were a few people who said, well, I'm not going to review a web page. That's not a published journal. But that was very few. Most people were very warm and welcoming. And that, of course, led to my Sous Vide review article for the International Journal of Gastronomy and Food Science, which is available free on my website. And somewhat surprising to me, that is more cited in academic journals.
So yeah, I'm pulling up your website so people can know what we're talking about here. So it's douglasbaldwin.com, and I have it tabbed to the sous vide section because that's where I send people and I go to all the time when I want to get way deep into stuff that wants to put me to sleep. So this is the everyday ordinary cook. When they look at this, their eyes kind of cross. So what I normally do is I try to which you have it all tabbed really well. So I just send them to a specific area and say, this is what you need to look at. You don't need to read everything in this because it can make you, if you're not, scientifically trained, you will, fall asleep pretty quickly or your eyes will cross. But there's plenty of stuff
even my
in here
non-technical summary is fairly technical. But thank goodness there's so many other great people now. Oh yeah, you can see a link right there to the excellent guide to Dr. Snyder, although I'm not sure if it still works. But there's so many wonderful people like Kenji Lopez and Chris Young and everyone else who makes it much more accessible.
Well, but it's still these tables are what everybody really needs to understand. And one of the first things people don't understand is the thickness instead of the weight. I mean, we still get this today a lot. Well, I got a 4-pound this, and I need to, it's like, well, how thick is it? That's the important thing, because food cooks from the outside in, and it really doesn't matter how much it weighs. It could, if it's a cylinder and it's long and it's, still only, 4 inches, around, or the circumference. So that's all it really matters. It doesn't matter how much it weighs. So that's the biggest part I think people don't understand. And then you send them somewhere like this and you go, hey, look, here's how it relates. And they go, oh, okay, now I understand. And because for some reason, everybody's always asked, how much does it weigh? And they're not used to going, how thick is it? Because that's the most important
and it really applies for just about any type of cooking, whether it's smoking or cooking in an oven. And I'm a little lazy. I don't even look at my table as much as you might expect. I use short little calculations in my head. I take the, say, thickness in inches, I square it, multiply it by 20 minutes per inch squared, and then I divide by the effective dimension. So steak is one-dimensional because the heat only comes from the top and bottom. A cylinder is two-dimensional because you can think of from the sides and the top coming in. And I guess if you actually were cooking a meatball, then it really would be three-dimensional, and so you divide by 3 or 2, whatever the dimension is. Or look at my tables, which do a little more in the background than that simple calculation. But for a lot of barbecue and roasting and even hamburgers on a grill, that comes out pretty well. Especially for the hamburgers, that's a favorite for me. It's just you can judge the thickness, square it, multiply it by 20. It's a pretty good guess for how long it'll take your burger to cook through.
Yeah, and definitely with ground meat, especially, it's a lot more important than let's say a steak, because the ground meat, there's all kinds of pathogens that can get inside of that. Then pathogens on a steak are mostly on the exterior; they don't go deep into the meat 90% of the time. So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's more important on something that's ground. But another thing that you have on this, I know a lot of people understand, they know that the Baldwin tables for pasteurization, but you also have the heating, the heating time ones, in here. And I think a lot of people kind of skip over that. They just kind of think they're the same thing, pasteurization and heat through is not really the same thing,
Yeah, that's
So
one of the most common emails that I get as a question, because on some of the thicker items, it is pasteurized before it is heated through at higher temperatures. So I always get an email going, well, I think you have a mistake on your table. So, actually, no. It's so if you are, say, doing it in a higher temperature water bath, then it will actually be pasteurized, say, before it's heated all the way through, because you only need to get the core to a certain temperature. But for thinner things, it takes much longer, say, to pasteurize, especially at lower temperatures. So it's really the sort of complicated mix. And that's why I did the tables, is there are just so many variables to keep track of.
Now, do you do any updates to your website or anything at all on here? Or you just kind of
very rarely.
There's a ton of information. And I always tell people, don't try to take it all in at once, just and you have the helpful videos in there as well to kind of, sparsed in between there, so people can, if they don't want to sit there and try to read about all the different kinds of pathogens that are out there, they can just watch a video and just believe me, there's a lot of pathogens. Okay?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, but I mean, but
I did the work so they don't have to. It's
so, but for the people that do want to know all that, the information is there. So that's really what I love about it. And you can click through. All these are click throughs that if you don't want to have to read through the whole book to go, okay, I just want to know what I need to do on a turkey breast. I can go right here to turkey breast. So, and there I go. Or the perfect egg. Here's all about eggs. Yeah. So it's really convenient and well put together. Now, you said you put the website together before you.
Yeah, that was back in about 2008 is when I posted that, and it was about 2 years later that I did my cookbook in 2010, which I was glad I was able to get it out then, because by that point people were really starting to get into sous vide at home and in restaurants to a larger extent. So I was happy that I could provide that information to people on what's good, safe times to cook food. And I really like to differentiate between, say, if you're cooking and you have a robust immune system and you just are cooking for flavor, that's going to be a little bit different than if you're cooking for someone that you don't know, how resistant they are or not. So I emailed to me about, my wife is pregnant, what do I do? And so being able to point to the pasteurization table, say, well, this is how long I would do the chicken breast, because that's going to reduce the risk of all kinds of things that your doctor's warning you about. But for the most part, you have a healthy, robust immune system. There's pretty little danger to most foods. If you buy from a good source and it's fresh, there's really just not that much worry. If you get a good steak,
right,
you do a quick sear. That's why people have been able to have blue and rare steaks for years, centuries. Yeah.
And even pork nowadays, people still think of back in the 70s when you had the whole, you get trichinosis if you eat undercooked pork. Well, there hasn't been a case of trichinosis in the United States in like forever from pork, commercially raised pork. So people still, I got to cook my pork all well done. It's like, well, I don't like my pork, well done. I don't like it medium rare either.
Right?
I don't like it medium rare either. But no, like a pork tenderloin.
Oh yeah.
Like 140, is perfect for me. I don't like it.
Well, a lot of it too is that the pork in particular and chicken, they are very lean and very young compared to like the traditional recipes. So this is why I think it's such a mistake in many ways to say, well, I can just follow the way that my grandmother or grandfather used to do this, because things have changed a lot since then.
Yeah.
My favorite example is on the whole chicken. Say you cook a whole chicken and you know it's cooked through, but you see that terrible looking red blood next to the bones.
Yeah, but the
You
bones,
go,
yeah.
what's up with that? And it's because the chickens are so young now that their bone is not formed enough to prevent the hemi coming through the bone. So even if it's fully cooked through, it might be really dark red just because of how young the chicken is compared to the past.
Right.
And it's the same with pork. They're
Mm-hmm.
getting very large pigs to that size much faster than they ever did before. So at least for me, can't say I really even enjoy most pork chops because they just taste too lean and too dry. And I'm much more in favor of things like pork shoulders and
Oh yeah,
where there's
fat's
so
flavor.
much. Yeah, exactly. Oh, so true. It's I always think it's funny when the old joke of, oh, this crocodile tastes like chicken. It's yeah, it's a lean meat. All
Yeah,
lean meats taste like chicken.
that's right. Because there's no flavor to it. And
Exactly.
now, if you bite into a thigh, it tastes a lot different than the breast. So
Oh yeah.
definitely, yeah, I'm a dark meat
Yeah.
man myself. So
Yeah, and
definitely,
it's a really good point to make between the what are the flavors from the sort of proteins and Maillard reaction. So if you roast a pork chop, most of the flavor is coming from the browning of the outside. It's that Maillard reaction. That's where
right.
so much flavor is from. And then you have the fat, and that's the sort of species characteristics. The
Mm-hmm.
fat from lamb just tastes a lot different than the fat from a cow. And so you just have
Yeah.
to think of these two components. And that's, I think, why so many people, including myself, love barbecue, because it tends to use the fattier meats with more connective tissue. And it's that
Oh yeah. Well, the working
sumptuous.
muscles
Yeah.
that need to be broken down, it's
Yes,
that
yes.
collagen and gelatin that forms when you're breaking down these hardworking muscles, and instead of a tenderloin that's very lean, doesn't really have a whole lot of flavor to it. The only
Yeah.
thing it has is that it's not tough,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
it doesn't have a whole lot of flavor. So I'd rather have a ribeye or even, I'd love to get a London broil, even though
Mm.
it's still kind of lean, but because it's a working muscle and it's kind of tough, if you cook it sous vide for, 36 hours or 48 hours, and then you sear it, it tastes awesome. My wife
Yeah.
actually loves that, more than a sirloin.
Oh, yeah.
When are you going to make me some more, that, they call it London broil at the store, but we all know it's top round. So
Yeah.
what normally they sell as London broil is top round. But those hardworking muscles, even I like top sirloin because it can be a little tougher than some of the other steaks. But if you cook it sous vide long enough, and it's nice and tender, and it's just since it's a harder working muscle, it's got more flavor to it. It's got more of that connective tissue and collagen that's getting broken down and turned
Yeah.
into gelatin, and it makes it more juicy. So
Yeah. And it's that's the one of the main powers of sous vide cooking, and something that was really long known to in barbecue is this idea that you can break these the tough connective tissues, mostly collagen, down at different temperatures. But there is a lower limit. That's why I don't really recommend doing sous vide below, say, 55 degrees Celsius, because different studies have looked at different things, but somewhere around 53 or so degrees Celsius. Sorry, I should probably do Fahrenheit and Celsius. So I usually don't recommend below 103 degrees Fahrenheit or 55 degrees Celsius, because below that temperature, you don't get the same breakdown of collagen into
right.
gelatin. So you could do it below that temperature for a very long time, and it's not going to tenderize. But really above about 130 degrees Fahrenheit, between 140, that's sort of the one nice band where you really can break down the connective tissue to make it much more tender. And at that point, you also don't have a lot of squeezing out of the juices of the muscle fibers. So I always think three different sort of main proteins when you're cooking meat sous vide, especially the tougher ones. You have the connective tissue, that's the collagen that we're trying to break down to something like gelatin to make it more tender. Although some muscles have a lot of elastin as well, and elastin doesn't break down
Right.
even with quite a bit of heat. If people have ever pressure cooked things and gone, well, how is that still tough? That's the elastin.
Yeah, it's silver skin, and it's the
Yeah,
connective tissue that
exactly. Yeah,
it's like tendons. They're not meant to break down. They're meant to
exactly
be
right.
like like cartilage. It's not going to really break
Yeah,
down on you. It's going to be so.
exactly. And then we also have the muscle fibers, and they're sort of the ones that make dramatic changes. So once you get too high of a temperature, they sort of squeeze down this way and
Contract, yeah.
redistribute the juices. And then at a higher temperature, they squeeze this way, and then that really pushes out a lot of the liquid. And so by cooking that lower temperature, like 130, 140 for the sous vide, you don't get the muscle fibers squeezing out all the juices.
Yeah. That is one thing I think a lot of people still don't understand, that even the people have been, cooking sous vide for a while. And I have to explain that to people, because my Facebook groups and stuff, I deal with a lot of the guys coming from barbecue into sous vide, and some of the sous vide guys coming and doing some barbecue. So that's one of the things they don't understand, that, okay, well, if I cook it at 150 degrees instead of, 156 degrees, why is it better to do 150 for maybe a few more hours instead of doing it at a higher temperature? And I try to explain, because those protein cells are contracting more and they're pushing more water out, the higher temperature you go. So if you keep it at 150, you're going to have it more moist, even though you're going 2 or 3 more hours, or even 4 or 5 or 10 more hours, because they're not contracting as much. When the temperature goes up, 4 or 5 more degrees, you're pushing out more moisture. Even though you're going to be in the bath longer, you're still pushing out more moisture for a shorter time. So it's going to be drier. So and I think getting their head wrapped around that part, because they just think of evaporation, I think is what they think. And you say, well, there's no evaporation, you're in a bag. So you're not evaporating, you're just pushing the temperature is what's pushing the moisture out of the protein cells. So you got to think of it, instead of evaporating because air, you're not doing that in there. So once they get that, they go, oh yeah, that's what I was thinking. So it's
exactly. Well, and I think it surprises a lot of people when they do sous vide cooking, especially for longer times and higher temperatures. It's just how much liquid is in the bag.
Right.
There's something wrong? No, that's how much always comes out. You just don't notice because it's evaporated in your oven or in your smoker. It still comes out. It's the same sort of process, except you get there is that sort of diffusion difference. So if you say put plain water in the bag or no water in the bag, you'll actually lose more water from the food if you cook in water within the bag, because you have that force saying, oh, I'm a little more salty in here, I'm going to push water and salt out. So that sort of osmotic diffusion of mass from within to out.
Sure. Now you just confused them even more. Now you got diffusion involved. No, I'm kidding. No, but I mean, hey, there's all this stuff that people don't know, that, not that they need to know it, but if they can have an idea of what's going on when they're cooking, that's what I like to get into, is you got to know what's going on and why things happen. Why is it better to cook at 150 than 160? When you're trying to do a low and slow and break down a protein, how is it that you do have moisture in the bag, and so you got to understand what's going on in there, and that's what I really love about it. Hey, all, I want to introduce you to a company I just started working with, Fresh Jack's Organic Spices out of Jacksonville, Florida. They're a small family-run company that's fast growing. I've tried a bunch of their different seasoning blends and spices, and I can tell you they're all fresh, all organic. None of them contain artificial flavors or sweeteners. None of them have anti-caking agents or preservatives. They all taste like they were just made for you yesterday. Check them out, guys. They're on Amazon in the link below. They have different sample packs, different blends. Like I said, they also have the individual seasonings and spices as well. Fresh Jack's Organic Spices. Check them out, guys. I love them. So let's talk about besides sous vide, what other kind of cooking methods do you get involved in or do?
Oh, I try and do just about everything I can. So,
because you're known for sous vide, but do you do anything else as far as professionally wise? Have you got into? I know that you do a lot of stuff for Breville now that's doesn't have to do with sous vide. So,
yeah, so it's really been fun for me the last few years working at Breville, because they make all kinds of different appliances, from espresso machines to toasters to food processors. So I get to work and answer a lot of questions on a whole bunch of different subjects. Even before I started at Breville, I was pretty obsessed with coffee and espresso. And I'm a little obsessed with the measurement. I don't think people would be surprised about that. So I have a little refractometer, and I check the coffee that I make to see how much dissolved solids have come out of the coffee, and measure the extraction yield to see if it's as good as it can possibly be. Because really, once you get into the science, you can apply it to almost anything. And there's a fantastic depth of geekiness in the coffee world, which I resonate with quite a bit. I do love smoking food as well. I have one of those barbecue stick burners, and I was so happy. I think happy when one of the cherry trees in my yard died, and I cut it up to feed my smoker. It's I feel like it has a better life smoking my meat than it did
producing cherries.
Yeah, it never really made many cherries, but it sure has made some delicious smoked meat.
Seems like you guys, all the Modernist Cuisine guys got one of those Caribicues, because I know Chris has one. I think you said Nathan's has one. Does Grant have one too?
I don't know. It really was Chris that convinced me to get it. Because he was just showing me some videos of the results. And I went, oh my goodness, that looks amazing.
It's a scientific smoker for sure, because you know, the smoke going through the coals to get rid of all the volatiles and stuff. I'm actually going to have Bill on my podcast.
Oh, great.
I've got a hold of Bill, and I'm going to have him on, because I've talked about this with Meathead, years ago. Meathead loves that smoker. Yeah. And I have a friend of mine that has it too. And, so I've heard a lot about it, and I'm going to see if I can, get some kind of, discount from Bill to get me one, because I've got about 6 cookers on my, patio right now, and I could probably fit another one in there. So
it's always funny how many of these devices we end up having.
Well, they're all different. All the ones I have are different. So they all do different things, or they have a certain need. I have a pellet grill that I like to use for certain things. I have a hasty bake that has the adjustable charcoal basket that goes up and down, so I can kind of use that. And I have a rotisserie for it. I got a Kamado grill that I like to use for different things. So it's just, I don't know. There's some people that collect, rocks and, other things, that I collect grills, and I like to play around with them, in sous vide devices. And I've probably got, 25 of those. I got the new Breville Hydro Pro Plus. So, I've got vacuum sealers now. I mean, it's
Yeah, it's the one that's sort of the excessive one I have is the chamber vacuum sealer. That's so over the top for home cooks, but it is a lot of fun.
I got 3 of those, and I got regular vacuum sealers too. So, and that's another one I want. I want that new MX, whatever it is, MX4 or whatever it is that PolyScience has, or the multivac or whatever it's called. That's got
I think the one PolyScience that's not sous vide that I've really become obsessed with over the last few years is the their induction Control Freak burner.
Yes, the Control Freak. Yeah, I'm looking. David said he's going to send one out to me to test out, because they're going to.
Oh, I think you'll love it.
They're doing a push on it, I guess, over the summer. So he said they're going to try to do some more marketing and stuff, and he wants to come on the podcast and do some stuff with it as well. So that thing is amazing too. Yeah, there's so many new toys, and that's one other thing I want to talk about. Over the last, I don't know, I would say the last 10 years at least, the technology that's been pushed into the cooking, not just at indoor, but outdoor as well, is just amazing. The Wi-Fi, Bluetooth on everything, all these different kinds of smokers and grills, all these different kinds of cookers. What do you think is going to continue to come? I mean, I had this discussion with Chris as well. Of course, one of the things he talked about was the combustion thermometer that he's working on that measures the, surface temperature and all that. I mean,
the surface temperature question is so interesting, because that's such a sort of hidden aspect of cooking in ovens and smokers and a bunch of other areas. Is what is the role of evaporative cooling? And if you know close to the surface temperature, then you know what the This comes up beautifully in the ANOVA precision oven, is this idea of the wet bulb versus the dry bulb temperature. So if I think you have one of those ovens and you set it in the sous vide mode, it's really controlling the wet bulb temperature, which is not exactly the surface temperature, but it's a good sort of analog to how much evaporative cooling you're getting from the food. So if you have a lower humidity, you have a higher air temperature, but the surface has more evaporation that cools it. And that's really going back to the stall and barbecue and why the Texas crutch works so well, is it's controlling how much evaporative cooling you have. And I think that's, I'm hoping the more thermometers we get into outdoor cooking, especially for the longer cooks, the more information people have in terms of, well, I find that I really like the taste of it at this temperature range. And each person might find that they have a different one. Maybe I prefer 160 and you prefer 150. I don't know. It's going to be a personal preference. And I think people are going to find the more they measure, the more repeatable they get exactly what they want. Although I think this is more of a short-term trend. I think in the next 10 to 20 years, people will be less knowing the number and more telling, repeating a program of something that they liked. We used to talk about that a lot at ChefSteps, the sort of engineering parameters versus the cook's parameters. Do you want it medium rare? Or do you want 130 degrees Fahrenheit? Is there a difference? I don't know.
Well, and I think, Chris kind of hit on that with the pictures on the Jewel app was, instead of telling somebody, okay, you want it to be 130, here's the picture. Choose from these pictures. And then you pick, I want it to look like that. And then, okay, this is what it is. So, which I think was very innovative. And I don't think anybody else has ever come out with something like that. They're still the only ones that have that. And I don't know why.
It all came around because my first project at ChefSteps was the egg calculator for how do you get the exact texture of yolk and texture of white that you want. I said, well, we should show videos. People can just select the video for the egg that they want. And that's became the sort of visual doneness, as we like to call it, of having videos showing the texture and the color of what you want. And I think it really is a powerful thing, especially in the beginning of a new technology. So, smoke food has been around forever, but sous vide's new, and it's because it's new, it's different, and you feel like you need to say, well, you might not have an intuition on this, so here's what you will get. And then you will do it a few times, and then you'll go, well, I just like it at 132, and you might just type in 132 next time, or whatever it might be. And I think it's how do we get you from sort of new to technology to having your own intuition and feel. So like on long cooks, I'll do a long cook and then I'll just pull the meat out and squeeze it, and I know from the feel of the meat if it's done or if it needs a few more hours. And I can do that because I have cooked obviously for a very long time on the sous vide, and I have this intuition. And it's one of the things I found working with people like Heiko Antonowitz, one of the early German chefs that got really into sous vide cooking. The first time I met and was in the kitchen with him, I saw him pull out the meat and squeeze it, and I go, oh, I do that too.
I mean, experience, because that's basically back before we even had, instant read thermometers. That's how the chefs would learn, is to kind of poke the meat to kind of see what medium rare was, if you can't do that if you're brand new, but if you've been doing it for 10 years, you're working a steakhouse and what okay, well, that's medium rare. I know what it feels like. You can feel the way the meat feels and the texture of it, then you can do that with experience, but right off the bat, you're not going to be able to figure it out.
And that's what the beauty of the thermometers are for the world of smoking is, well, now it's gone up to this temperature. We know it only takes this many hours at that temperature until it's the right doneness. And it really sort of pulls back the curtain to really understand how to get exactly what you want every time. And I think that's so much the allure of sous vide cooking is I get the same, if I like it, I get the same thing every time. And now I can worry about other things. I don't have to worry about, is this roast done? I just know it's going to be. So, and that also allows for, I mentioned this in our pre-chat, the sort of biggest mistake I feel I made on my cookbook is not talking about batch cooking enough.
Yeah.
And that, I'm just going to buy a bunch of chicken breasts. I'm going to pasteurize them all, individually bagged, chill them down and freeze them. And now I just pop it in the bath to warm up for half an hour, 45 minutes before lunch. And it's perfect.
Yeah.
And I don't have to worry about
sear it. Right. Yep.
Exactly. And same thing with things like barbecue. If I'm cooking for myself or a few people, I can't eat a whole brisket.
Or a whole pork butt. I got, like I told you, I've got 4 or 5 things of pork butt, in vacuum sealed bags in my freezer. All I have to do is toss it in the sous vide just to heat it up to 140 degrees or so, where I like it for my mouthfeel, and take it out, and boom, it's done. It's awesome. It's amazing that some of the things that we can do now with that. One of the things I love about mixing sous vide and barbecue, and I write about this in the book I put out, and I tell people all the time, especially when I go into the barbecue groups and people go, "Oh, sous vide, it's stupid." It's like, there's things you can make by combining the 2 cooking methods that you can't make with those cooking methods on their own. You can't make a medium rare, tender brisket just by smoking it. You can't do it. You can't make a smoky brisket just by sous videing it, so if you combine the 2 methods, you can produce food that you can't make with any other cooking method, so there's some things that you want to explore your palate. I want to try something totally different that I can't go to a restaurant and order. Well, if they did it that way, they could, I guess, but still, it's that people never had before. If I can make a medium rare brisket, or even a medium brisket, and it still be smoky and juicy and tender, and not, the well done, that they make, somebody's going to taste that, and it's going to taste totally different than Aaron Franklin's brisket. Because people will go, "Well, is it going to be better than this one?" Or it doesn't mean it's better. It's just different, right?
Yeah.
When does everything got to be better than something else? It just drives me crazy when people say that. And it's like, have you ever had medium rare beef ribs before? No. Well, okay, I'm not saying it's going to be better than anything else, but it's totally something different you never had before, right? So why don't you try it? So
it brings a little more fun and play,
experimentation and stuff. Trying new things.
I think that so much of it is just we just want to be a little more like kids playing in the kitchen,
exactly.
Playing, smoking things. What happens if I do this? Well, okay, it didn't come out. That's okay. I'll just heat up something else from the freezer.
That's right. Or, I'll try something else. I'll try something a little different next time, and maybe that'll come out better. But that's the fun part of cooking for me is being able to create things, and then, going out to my family going, "Here, try this."
Yes.
And they either spit it out or they go, "That's pretty good." So, and then I won't make that again, or I'm going to make that again. So
for every big family barbecue I do, I always have like the 2 warming trays with what appears to be the same thing, with a little thing of drop one of these marbles into the one that you liked the most of the 2. Like, are you doing an A/B test on me? Maybe. Yes, I am. Just let me know later what you prefer. They're both good,
kill you. Don't
but they're
worry.
a little bit different. Just let me know what you prefer.
It's not going to kill you. Don't worry. So what's in the future for you, Douglas? Are you going to write another book? Or are you just
Well, at the moment, I'm doing a lot of patents at work on trying to push the technology here and there. My latest writing project was doing 2 chapters for a new CRC handbook on molecular gastronomy, edited by Herv Thies. Admittedly, it's only 2 of many, many chapters. It's one of those projects that started years ago, and they asked me to do a few chapters, and I think it's grown to something like 1,500 pages now. With
kind of like Modernist Cuisine, right? That's how Chris said Modernist Cuisine started out. Like it was going to be like maybe 4 or 5 chapters on sous vide, and it turned into, 5 books. So
exactly. So it's sort of so makes me so happy to see in these sort of blend of science and cooking projects that they start small and they just grow larger and larger. I think it shows that we're still in that early fun, creative, let's just see what can happen,
Right.
period. We're not in that, well, everything is known and this is what it will always be. And I'm glad that we are all alive in this time when it's fun and we get to see what new things we can make. I hope eventually to write another cookbook, but I'm really waiting to find that there is a hole, a gap that needs me to do the work. If other people fill the gap, I'm happy to have them fill the gap. That's the reason I wrote my Sous Vide cookbook, because I felt, well, no one else is really being rigorous enough to make it safe and delicious for everyone. And so long as other people are doing that, I'm probably not going to write another cookbook. But if we run one in particular that is on the top of my mind is the use of steam ovens in individual homes. I'm hoping that someone will find, answer all the questions that are there. If not, then I might come in and write a book to answer those questions.
So going back to your original book, the original website that you created, how long did it take you to do all that? I mean, all that experimentation and, calculations and research and study and putting it all down. How long did it take you from start to finish to put all that together?
Oh, it took at least a year of pretty obsessive, long hours of investigation. The sort of initial version didn't take very long, though. It really started at the very beginning as, let's try and take the very best that's in the e-gullet, and that was the first kernel of my webpage. And then I just read more and more. As I said, I read, basically I did a PhD on sous vide cooking while I was doing a PhD
Well,
on
that's what it
applied
looks
mathematics.
Like.
It really is. Yeah, it's covers. I basically, at the time when I wrote it, read every available academic paper that was in existence on sous vide and anything even slightly related to sous vide cooking, which in the end meant that I ended up reviewing for a lot of those journals I read. They would send me new papers and I'd be able to read through them and go, oh, they cited a paper and that wasn't in that paper. So I type in, they made a mistake in their citation. It was actually this paper instead.
Well, and the good thing is you went out and you found all that information. You stuck it in one spot for everybody so that we didn't have to go and try to look it up and find it. So, which makes it really, really convenient. And like I said, I know everybody uses your, I've got mine bookmarked and I send it to people all the time, especially when people ask these pasteurization tables and how long for, I got a 10-pound roast. I mean, it's like, okay, here you go. Look at this chart. And that's from now on, it's the size of it. It's not the weight of it. Make sure you measure it and then look at this. And here's all the information you need, because do you get reports on how much traffic goes to your site?
I probably do, but I haven't looked at them.
I was just going to say, it's got to be a lot, because I know I send a lot of people there, and a lot of people I know send people there. So
I'm just glad that I can provide this resource to people. And if I ever do find that the science is outdated, I will update. But so far, I haven't found any evidence that I need to update the pasteurization tables, for example. I haven't found any new research that says that it needs to be updated. Luckily, the food pathogens don't really evolve very quickly, and so it doesn't really need to be updated. But
well, getting back to pasteurization, I want to touch on this, because I think one of the other things people tend to get overly concerned about is thinking that they have to pasteurize every inch of the meat. And we kind of touched on it a little earlier, that you said that just because it's pasteurized doesn't mean it's cooked all the way through, which means it doesn't need to be pasteurized all the way through.
Yeah.
Correct?
Exactly. So it's good to sort of break it up into sort of risk and hazard, if you will. So the risk might be to the person, does someone have a high risk for foodborne illness, or are you just the average healthy American who just loves red meat? Great. Okay. Well, then you're in this category. And for that, it really depends on the food you're cooking. If you're cooking ground meat or poultry, you really do have to cook it all the way through, because there can be pathogens inside. That said, if it is a really good, fresh piece of meat from someone that you know, like I would get a lot of beef at my family because my mother grew up on a farm. We would know the farmer, and we would know exactly how that side of beef came to be. And
Right.
so, and we know our risk level. So we can cook at a very different level than, okay, I got this ground beef from the store. Well,
Right.
we don't know much about that ground beef, so we better cook it all the way through and make sure it is fully pasteurized. Then we have things like a steak. If it hasn't been
Blade
mechanically
tenderized.
tenderized,
Yeah.
then it's basically intact inside. So there basically is no pathogens inside the food, and you really only need to sear the outside to make it safe. And so this is why it's you sort of divide things into the, I really want to get into all of it, or I just want some simple answers for what to do.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's where people they try to look at it at the 3,000 foot level sometimes. And then, but they put the kibosh on, well, everybody needs to look at it that way. Cause I'll see it in the Facebook groups, especially somebody will go, well, I want to cook it at 100 and, 28 degrees, and I only want to cook it for 2 hours, and people go, oh, but it's not pasteurized all the way through. And it's like, well, it doesn't need to be pasteurized all the way through. You don't understand that. Maybe it won't be cooked all the way through, but it doesn't need to be pasteurized all the way through if it's a thick ribeye steak that's not blade tenderized. So I think people miss that point, and I'm always trying to correct people on that. So
and there's a few sort of good general guidelines for a lot of people. One is if you're trying to tenderize the meat, make sure you use a high enough temperature. If you're not trying to tenderize the meat and it's already tender, say a nice steak that you want, then the thing to sort of say is, well, if I'm doing a lower temperature, let me not do it for more than 4 to 6 hours. Because after that amount of time at a low temperature, some unpleasant things can happen.
Yeah, definitely.
I think everyone has, even I've pushed things a little too far and opened it up and gone, no, I'm not going to eat that.
Well, and not even that. If I put a fillet in there for 6 hours, at 132 degrees, it turns into mush, and you bite into it and you go, I did it with a leg of lamb once.
Oh, yes.
I did. I for some reason, I thought I needed to go like 18 hours on this leg of lamb, and it turned into like it just blew in my mouth. But
yes, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about that too, because I know that another thing that comes up, people try to cook vegetables the same way they cook proteins, because vegetable proteins are a lot different than animal proteins, and they'll try to cook vegetables together with their steak, and it comes out and it's totally raw.
Yes, exactly. So it's just what proteins there are. And I think the one for cooking vegetables, you can think of the little cells, and between them is pectic polysaccharides, basically pectic cement. So pectin people use for jellies and things like that all the time. And to be able to bite into them, you need to dissolve the pectin that holds the cells together. And that's really happens around 85 degrees Celsius. I'm sorry, I don't remember what that is in Fahrenheit.
Usually about 183 or 185 degrees is what I usually do Fahrenheit.
Yeah. So above that temperature, then you break up, you don't burst the cells, but you break up what's holding the cells together, and that makes it tender enough to eat. Where traditional microwave, steaming, boiling, not only do you break up what holds the cells together, but you actually explode the cells as well, because you break down the cells, you burst them. And so that ends up with that sort of mushy vegetables that change color really quickly. It's because, you've broken up the cells. Where on the sous vide one at the higher temperatures, you can get really vibrant colors because you haven't broken up the cells. You've only dissolved what's holding the cells together enough that it's tender enough to eat. Some things like beans, though, need pretty high temperatures, like 195 Fahrenheit, to really tenderize them, or they just don't break down enough, especially the skins, that they're enjoyable to eat.
Yeah, some of my favorite things to cook sous vide are vegetables like asparagus and stuff like that, where it's just, if you cook it to the perfect temperature, man, it's still got that little bit of a crisp, but
Mhm.
you can eat it, and it's like you said, the colors are there, the flavor's there, because you're not boiling or steaming the flavor out of it. And carrots are another thing that just they're amazing. I don't see people, really. That's one of the things they don't understand because they don't understand how to cook them in there, because
Yeah.
they try to cook it like they cook a steak, and they
Yeah.
fail, and they go, man, I can't use it for that.
Yeah.
But once they figure it out, I don't, I wouldn't want to cook vegetables any other way, because they just taste totally different.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes you get really wonderful, intense flavors that you can't get in other ways, because when you boil in water, you really are leaching a lot of the volatile flavor compounds. A lot of the tastes and nutrients go into the water. Now, for some vegetables, that you might want that. Maybe it's a little too strong, and you have, say, if you're doing cooking for kids, maybe they don't want the full taste of parsnips. That's okay. Maybe you want to boil it for them. But you might want it, so it's really lets you choose, and I think it also lets it's a little bit like going into slow motion, in the sense that when you're cooking these lower temperatures, you just have a longer window where they're great.
Right.
If you boil for too long, well,
forget about it.
But if you do the vegetable sous vide, then you have the pretty long window where they're really good, and but that's sort of the problem too, right? Sometimes you just need a quick side.
Yeah. Sometimes you gotta microwave stuff.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, Douglas, I really appreciate it. It's been great, and I'm sure I'll have you on again someday talking about some other things you're working on. But we could probably sit here and talk for another 3 hours and go into.
Oh, probably.
Because this kind of stuff is fun for me, and I really I like talking to people like you that have the analytical background and moved it into food, and make you're doing something you actually love. So you're not teaching applied mathematics, but you're using it.
I actually really enjoyed that too. Other people can teach applied mathematics. I always try and ask, what is it that only I can do, and or only a few people can do, and so I try and go there. And so, but yeah, it's been wonderful talking with you, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Definitely. And everybody, just make sure you check out DouglasBaldwin.com. You'll find a lot of information on sous vide in there. And you can find his book. I think your book is still on Amazon. They can still find it. Sous vide.
It is on Amazon. Sometimes, though, it sells out on Amazon. And I have a link to the, so you can buy it from the publisher on my webpage if it's sold out on Amazon.
Now,
never
is there
pay
a lot
more than the $29 or $24.95 or whatever the price is. Never pay more than that. Sometimes it sells out, and used book places jack up the price to ridiculous
I've seen that. Now, is there a lot more information in the book than there is in the
different
website?
Information on the book. That's a great point. So the web page only has about 12 recipes, and it's pretty technical. The cookbook, I sort of distill out most of the technical parts and really focus more on what you need to cook at home, and it has about 200 recipes. Then I also have a scientific article that's linked to on my webpage that is very technical, and more for if you are a restaurant trying to get working with your health department, and you need to prove that it's safe.
The HACCP stuff.
It's more for that. So it's not really for the general reader. So that's sort of the three things that I have available right now.
Well, definitely. So check out Sous Vide for the Home Cook on Amazon. Check out DouglasBaldwin.com, and you'll learn more than you ever wanted to know about sous vide. That's for sure. So it's definitely good stuff, and I really appreciate you being on, and thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks again for joining us on the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I want to thank Dr. Douglas Baldwin for being on. Make sure you check out DouglasBaldwin.com. You can check out all the information he has on there. Of course, a link to his book, Sous Vide for the Home Cook. And make sure you follow the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast, both anywhere you get your audio podcasts and on our YouTube channel, Fire and Water Cooking. Make sure you check out the Facebook page and group, Fire and Water Cooking. And I'll see you again on the next Fire and Water Cooking Podcast.